The 9,915th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in the meeting. Mr. Hans Grunberg, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, and Mrs. Dina El Mamoun, Yemen Country Director, Center for Civilians in Conflict. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. And I give the floor to Mr. Hans Grunberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, developments in Yemen and the wider region have evolved at pace since my last briefing to this Council. Allow me to begin by welcoming the announcement on the 6th of May of a cessation of hostilities between the United States of America and Ansar Allah. This step represents an important and necessary de-escalation in the Red Sea and in Yemen, following the resumption on 15th of March of US airstrikes against targets in Ansar Allah-controlled areas. I sincerely commend the Sultanate of Oman for their efforts to achieve this agreement. As I have said many times before, it has become increasingly clear that the level of de-escalation in the Red Sea and in the wider region is needed to bring Yemen back to the path toward peace. Events in the recent weeks, however, have also served as stark reminders that Yemen is ensnared in the wider regional tensions. The attack carried out by Ansar Allah on Ben Gurion Airport on the 4th of May and the subsequent strikes by Israel on Hodeidah Port, Sana'a Airport, and other locations in response represent a dangerous escalation, and the threats and attacks regrettably continue. I renew my call for all parties to abide by their obligations under international law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. Nevertheless, the announcement of 6th of May provides a welcome opportunity on which we must collectively build to refocus on resolving Yemen's conflict and advancing a Yemeni-owned peace process. The challenges facing Yemen are immense, from the deep and significant levels of mistrust between the parties, with some still reportedly preparing for war, to near economic collapse. As an indicator of the deep economic instability that Yemen is facing, there has been continued deterioration of the currency during the last month, now surpassing 2,500 Yemeni riyal to the dollar. Citizens have suffered worsening electricity blackouts in government of Yemen-controlled areas, with recent reports of electricity outage for up to 15 hours per day in Aden and a total blackout for over 2 weeks in the neighboring governorates of Lahej and Abyan. On Saturday, women took to the streets in Aden to protest and demand better public services and their basic rights. Meanwhile, in Ansar Allah-controlled areas, the population also suffers from a loss of purchasing power. Civil servants' salaries have not been paid in full for years. The physical quality of the currency is deteriorating, and liquidity is drying up. Yet, as ordinary people are increasingly unable to afford the most basic commodities, civil society voices there are being repressed. In this regard, I am looking forward to listening to the briefing of Ms. El Mamoun from the Center of Civilians in Conflict. Mr. President, across Yemen, the general economic degradation reinforces how urgently Yemen requires a political path to allow for the collaboration needed for economic growth. I am continuing to actively work with Yemeni parties and regional partners to identify solutions to economic challenges and resume dialogue towards this goal. Mr. President, I have been clear and consistent in my approach, and I will remain so. The United Nations is committed to offering a viable alternative to military and economic escalation and potential return to war, and we will continue to work to bring the parties to the table to identify and agree on solutions that are acceptable to all. It may seem, Mr. President, to some that amidst so much upheaval and so much mistrust, a political process is an unrealistic and naive goal. I am here to argue that this is not the case. The fact is that the parties have already committed to the basis of what should be the beginning of a political process in Yemen. A nationwide ceasefire, measures to address urgent economic and humanitarian issues, and an inclusive political process. These are commitments that need to be fulfilled for there to be a sustainable peace. This is the case now and will be the case in the future. All Yemenis can rest assured the United Nations will remain ready and unwavering in our support for a negotiated exit from conflict and for a just, inclusive, and sustainable peace. I recognize, however, that as time passes, the positions become further entrenched and challenges become more complex. Some may be questioning whether the roadmap is still valid. My answer remains resolutely the same. Yemen will still need the elements of the roadmap: a ceasefire, economic recovery, and an inclusive political process in order to move forward. That said, I recognize that the mediation environment has changed significantly since late 2023, and the need for additional guarantees to enable the buy-in of the parties and to ensure the support of the region and the international community and this Council. Mr. President, Yemenis want to move forward. The status quo is untenable. And while the front lines may currently appear relatively stable, what Yemen has now is not peace. The continued engagement of the international community is needed to help Yemenis realize their desire to build a country that is stable, prosperous, and safe. Yemen's neighbors and international partners are needed to support a viable Yemeni-led inclusive political process. And since I last briefed you, I have held meetings with the parties and the diplomatic community in Riyadh and Muscat, reiterating this message. Mr. President, as I draw to a close, I want to raise again the unlawful, arbitrary, and prolonged detention by Ansarallah of UN staff, as well as those from international and national NGOs, civil society, and diplomatic missions. Not only is their detention in violation of international law, but it has also caused a significant chilling effect throughout the international community, which only has one outcome: undermining support to Yemen, which will sadly impact the Yemenis most in need. I welcome the recent releases of staff members from the Dutch Embassy and international organization. This demonstrates what is possible, but these releases are woefully insufficient. I hope Ansarallah will hear very clearly what I am saying. Change course, release the remaining detainees immediately without conditions, bring this unacceptable situation to an end. Mr. President, Yemenis have endured over 10 years of instability, uncertainty, and economic collapse. I speak directly to them now, and I reiterate what I have said before. I see you, I hear you, you have not been forgotten, and I won't relent in my efforts to pursue peace and stability in Yemen. To the parties, I urge you to be courageous and choose dialogue. The United Nations will not waver in its commitment to support you in finding a negotiated settlement to this conflict. And lastly, to you here today in this chamber, the collective global membership of the United Nations has conferred upon this Council the primary responsibility for maintenance of peace and security. This is particularly true for Yemen. Real peace and security in Yemen can only be achieved through international commitment, coordination, and a common and long-term approach. We must therefore redouble our efforts to offer a credible alternative to war and a vision for Yemen beyond status quo and stagnation. I am grateful for your continued unity and support for my efforts to achieve a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Yemen. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Grunberg for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Tom Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Special Envoy Grunberg for his briefing and his tireless and creative work. I also join him in condemning the arbitrary detention of our colleagues in Yemen and in calling for concerted and sustained advocacy by all member states to secure the immediate release of our UN and NGO colleagues. I also share the Special Envoy's relief at the cessation of hostilities in Yemen and the Red Sea between the US and the Houthis, including what we hope to be an end to airstrikes. Let's be clear, though, that Yemen is not out of the woods. The humanitarian situation is deteriorating, and those most in peril are the country's children. The numbers say it all. Half of Yemen's children, 2.3 million, are malnourished, 600,000 of them severely so. And malnutrition is not just about hunger. It attacks immunity, leaving children vulnerable to deadly infections like pneumonia and diarrhea, both of which are leading causes of child mortality in Yemen. Only 69% of children under 1 year of age are fully immunized. 20% have no vaccines at all, one of the worst rates in the world. And as a result, vaccine-preventable diseases are compounding the humanitarian crisis. Cholera, measles cases are rising. Last year, Yemen accounted for over a third of global cholera cases, 18% of related deaths, while also reporting one of the highest measles burdens globally. And that's not all. Children also have to contend with fields littered with landmines, schools emptied of teachers, books, and opportunities. And of course, children are not alone in being disproportionately impacted. As I've briefed previously, malnutrition also now affects 1.4 million pregnant and breastfeeding women, placing mothers and newborns at grave risk. Overall, 9.6 million women and girls are in severe need of life-saving humanitarian support, facing hunger, violence, and a collapsing healthcare system. Despite this, women and girls remain on the front line of recovery and survival. And I applaud this Council's commitment to supporting them and their struggle to have their fundamental rights respected. However, Mr. President, we're running out of time and resources. Yemen's 2025 humanitarian response plan is barely 9% funded, less than half of what we received at the same time last year. And these shortfalls, of course, have very real consequences. Nearly 400 health facilities, including 64 hospitals, will stop operating, impacting nearly 7 million people. Funding for 700 midwives we're supporting right now is quickly running out. 20 therapeutic feeding centers, 2,200 therapeutic feeding programs have already been forced to close down, denying life-saving nutrition treatment to more than 350,000 malnourished children and mothers in areas controlled by the de facto authorities. We expect pipeline gaps as early as June or July, right when the malnutrition numbers will peak. And while I note this Council's proper concern for survivors of gender-based violence, funding cuts also mean that many survivors no longer have access to life-saving healthcare, psychosocial support, and legal aid. Almost 1 million women and girls have lost access to safe spaces and associated support networks. Later this month, senior officials from across the donor community will convene in Brussels to assess the humanitarian situation in Yemen. And we count on them, we count on you, to recommit their collective support, your collective support, with concrete contributions to this humanitarian appeal at this critical moment. Mr. President, as you've heard, last month saw yet further challenges on the road towards a more peaceful future for Yemen. According to local authorities and open source reporting, almost 1,000 civilians have been killed or injured in Yemen since the beginning of the year, a significant number since the resumption of airstrikes in mid-March. Strikes that impacted Rassi support and a detention center in Saada resulted in hundreds of casualties, including injuries to first responders. Civilian infrastructure, including health facilities, has been damaged. The Hodeidah port, a vital access point for food and medicine, and Sana'a airport were also badly damaged, in addition to power stations and other critical infrastructure. I echo the Secretary General's appeal for respect for international humanitarian law and urge all parties to protect civilians and the infrastructure on which they rely for their basic needs. Mr. President, this is a tough time to be a humanitarian, but when backed to do so, we can deliver on your behalf. Over the past 4 weeks, health partners have deployed surgical teams to hospitals in Sana'a and Al Hodeidah, supported mobile medical teams, delivered trauma units to hospitals in 8 governorates. Life-saving cash assistance has continued for 4,000 families, that's roughly 28,000 people, enabling them to access essential needs like food, medicine, and shelter. Roughly 20,000 health consultations are conducted monthly for migrants. Water networks have been extended in Marib city to provide displaced families with clean water. And this builds on solid progress since the beginning of the year. In the first quarter of 2025, almost 150 humanitarian partners provided life-saving assistance across Yemen's 333 districts. Nearly 5 million people received emergency food assistance. 1.2 million received clean water and hygiene services. And 154,000 children resumed learning through temporary classrooms, supplies, and teacher support. Thank you for the support that allowed us to reach them. Noor, 16 months old from a small community in large governorate, was severely malnourished. A visiting community health volunteer supported by an NGO partner diagnosed her, referred her to a nearby health facility where, with time and treatment, her condition has improved and she's recovered fully. This work, with your support and the support of member states, does make a difference to individuals, many individuals, but we can't stop here. A child like Noor may recover from malnutrition, only to be readmitted later because their family cannot access clean water. A displaced family may find a safe harbor from violence, only to be uprooted shortly thereafter when fighting again reaches their doorstep. So yes, the people of Yemen need aid, but they also need peace. They need a respite from the violence and economic hardships which have caused so much suffering over the last decade. They need the opportunity to rebuild their lives. Mr. President, the cuts are, as I've described, biting hard. People are dying. And here in Yemen, as elsewhere, we are determined to save as many lives as we can with the money that we have. Over the past 2 months, we've overhauled our response in Yemen, aligned with the global humanitarian reset that I set out in March. We are substantially reducing our operational costs, so more money can be spent on saving lives. We've prioritized our humanitarian appeal to identify only the most urgent life-saving work. We're also doubling our investments in local partners. We've also simplified our coordination structures, bringing decision-making closer to the communities that we serve. Their voices will drive the reset in Yemen and elsewhere. Because behind the numbers are people like Noor. We know that there are many we will not reach. But in the 6 months that I've been in this job, I have seen firsthand the relentless tenacity that drives humanitarians not to give up. And Yemen is no different. Despite funding shortfalls, surging needs, and the risks we face, we will continue to serve people like Noor. Mr. President, as ever, I conclude with 3 asks of the Council. Firstly, please take action to ensure respect for international humanitarian law, including protection of civilians and humanitarian access to all those in need. Second, please provide scaled up, flexible funding to sustain critical aid operations. And third, and as the Special Envoy has underlined, back efforts towards lasting peace. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Fletcher for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mrs. Dina El Mamoun, Country Director of Civic.
Mr. President, Excellencies and members of the Council, thank you for the opportunity to address you today on behalf of Center for Civilians in Conflict Civic. I speak with urgency and purpose as we mark 25 years since the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, a commitment that is yet to be fulfilled for Yemeni women and girls. I would like to begin with the words of Amata Salam Al-Hajj, founder and chair of the Association of Mothers of Abductees. She said, "Women in Yemen have suffered greatly from the war. They aspire to peace and justice. Mothers are waiting for their loved ones and calling for freedom for their children. We say peace begins in the hearts of mothers." Mr. President, after 10 years of conflict, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen remains one of the most severe, and its most punishing consequences are frequently borne by women and girls. The protection of civilians, particularly women, is falling, and the structures meant to uphold international law are faltering. Women and girls in Yemen continue to be killed, wounded, and displaced. They are not just caught in the crossfire. They are often deliberately targeted and systematically marginalized. Gender-based violence is on the rise, often perpetrated with impunity, and with life-saving basic services, including GBV response, remains inaccessible for millions. 3 out of 4 Yemenis displaced by the conflict are women and children. In many cases, girls under 18 head households, and trying to survive in camps without adequate shelter or protection. Economic collapse is driving more families to resort to early marriage, deepening existing inequalities and stripping girls of the rights and futures. And still, in these dire circumstances, women lead. Every day on the ground, they play vital roles across the humanitarian development peace nexus. Women are at the forefront of humanitarian response efforts, community-based conflict resolution, and peace-building initiatives. They deliver aid to those beyond the reach of large institutions. In 2024 alone, women-led organizations reached over 2 million Yemenis with life-saving support. Women are agents of change and experts in the needs of their communities. They mediate disputes and build bridges. Through community-based protection groups facilitated by Civic, women bring communities together to discuss the protection threats they face. Women sit with armed actors to demand better protection. As just in one example, in one of these groups, women successfully engaged with security forces to limit night raids that had terrorized the small communities in their district. One member of a local initiative supported by Civic has mediated between conflict parties for many years and led negotiations to exchange the bodies of fighters across the front lines. She told Civic, "I physically carried bodies up and down mountainous areas. I don't know how I do it, but I think of the mothers and families in the affected communities." Maha Awad, chair of Wujud Foundation for Human Security, said, "As a diverse group, women have proven themselves to be peace builders who understand the importance of authentic dialogue from their local and national contexts. Yet, they face daily risks. In recent years, there has been a disturbing rise in threats, harassment, and detention of women human rights defenders, humanitarian workers, and peace builders. Some have been held for over a year without charge. The message is clear. Dissent will be silenced, and women's participation in peace initiatives suppressed. A climate of fear prevails. This is not only a protection concern, it is a direct threat to peace." Mr. President, members of the Council, despite the extraordinary work women across Yemen carry, they continue to be excluded from meaningful participation in formal peace negotiations and discussions. This results in the marginalization of their unique perspectives and needs and undermines prospects for sustainable peace. Let us be clear, we cannot continue to celebrate women's resilience while ignoring the root causes of the insecurity and protection risk they face. I urge the Council to act on 3 fronts. First, demand that all parties to the conflict abide by their obligations under international law to protect civilians, including women and girls, from direct and indirect harm. There must be accountability, including for gender-based violence, and address for harm caused. Second, increase direct, flexible funding and political support for women human rights defenders and peace builders in Yemen. They need legal aid, physical security, capacity building, and funding for their self-protection efforts on the ground. And above all, they need the political backing of this Council. Third, ensure the full and equal meaningful participation of women at all stages in the political process. This means no less than 30% representation in all peace negotiations and in post-conflict governance. This is a prerequisite for success. Diplomatic and financial support to women's peace process must be made conditional on this standard being met. Mr. President, 25 years ago, the international community, with the leadership of this Council, promised to make women central to peace and security, based on the shared understanding of the importance of their protection, empowerment, and participation. Today, that promise is being broken. The women of Yemen continue to show us what courage looks like. It is time we matched it with the political resources they deserve. The future of Yemen depends on it. Thank you.
I thank Mrs. El Mamoun for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Grunberg, USG Fletcher, and Mrs. El Mamoun for their briefings today. And I also welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen at our briefing. I'll make 4 points. First, the UK remains committed to restoring freedom of navigation and maritime security in the Red Sea. We welcome recent efforts to de-escalate tensions in the region, and we hope these efforts can help provide the pathway to sustainable peace in Yemen, in line with the Special Envoy's efforts. As we've seen, with continued threats against neighbouring countries and worrying posturing on the front lines in Yemen, the risk of escalation remains. Through a coordinated international approach, the UK will continue to work towards effectively containing Houthi capabilities. Maritime security is essential in upholding stability in the region. The UK continues to support the Yemen Coast Guard in protecting their maritime borders, and we look forward to launching the Yemen Maritime Security Partnership alongside the government of Yemen and international partners in June. Second, as highlighted by Mrs. El Mamoun, women face a disproportionate impact from the conflict in Yemen. In 2023, Yemen ranked second to last in the Georgetown Institute's Women, Peace and Security Index, and we've not seen progress since then. According to the Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, most of the 4.8 million internally displaced people are women, and 6.2 million women and girls are at risk of gender-based violence. Last year, UK funding supported nearly 1.5 million women and children with essential life-saving services and enabled 15,000 to receive protection and gender-based violence response services. The UK continues to champion the important role that women can play in both ending the conflict in Yemen and upholding sustainable peace. In November 2024, the UK hosted a group of Yemeni women leaders and experts on the Women, Peace and Security agenda to provide a vital platform for these important voices. The UK also remains committed to supporting the UN Special Envoy's work to meaningfully engage women activists and women-led organisations to deliver inclusive and sustainable peace in Yemen. Third, President, as USG Fletcher has said, the humanitarian situation is severe. The UK continues to condemn the ongoing detentions of aid workers by the Houthis, and we reiterate our clear call for the immediate and unconditional release of all those detained. The Houthis' unjustified detention of aid workers continues to shrink the humanitarian operating environment in a context where nearly 20 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. And finally, we're grateful for the efforts of Dr. Ahmed bin Mubarak, the former Prime Minister of Yemen, and we welcome the new Prime Minister, Salem bin Brake. We look forward to working together with the new Prime Minister and continuing our support for the government of Yemen's ambitious reform programme. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for this statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Thank you, Mr. President. Panama would like to express its thanks to the presidency of this council for convening this meeting. Also to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Hans Grunberg, and Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher, for their valuable contributions today and for their tireless and important work. We also would like to recognize the significant contribution of Mrs. Dina El Mamoun and extend a cordial welcome to the distinguished representative of Yemen with us today in the meeting. We are deeply concerned as we see the resurgence and the escalation of tensions in Yemen, a situation that threatens to further weaken the fragile stability in the country and seriously endangers the civilian population, and also undermines and complicates mediation efforts at the regional and international level. The worsening conflict not only is a serious obstacle to peace efforts, but also it worsens the humanitarian suffering, particularly between the most vulnerable members of society, women, girls and boys, and increases the number of displaced. More than 9.6 million people require urgent humanitarian assistance, including pregnant women and women who have recently given birth. In Yemen, women are facing a constant threat of sexual violence, early and forced marriage, as well as the risk of becoming victims of trafficking in persons. We condemn the restrictions limiting the freedom of movement of women and restrict their access to basic services, including the mahram requirement in areas controlled by the Houthis. Panama recognizes and very much appreciates the efforts of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, whose work has been key to promoting a peaceful solution through dialogue, and also the work of Tom Fletcher. What you are doing is so essential to provide humanitarian assistance to the population suffering in Yemen. We reaffirm our commitment that dialogue is the only path to bring about a sustainable and inclusive political solution led by the Yemenis themselves, which will guarantee the security and lasting stability in the Republic of Yemen. In this regard, we continue to promote an inclusive peace process which focuses on the participation, dignity, security, and leadership of women and girls in Yemen. In order to move in this direction, mediation efforts continue to be fundamental in order to prevent a further escalation of the conflict and provide a path towards sustainable peace. These are key steps that are needed to contain violence. Equally, we firmly reiterate our insistence on the immediate and unconditional release of everyone arbitrarily detained, including representatives of the United Nations, non-governmental organizations, national and international, as well as members of civil society and the diplomatic corps. We call upon all parties to fully respect international law and international humanitarian law, adopting all measures necessary to safeguard the civilian population and protect civilian infrastructure. Panama reiterates its condemnation of the attacks carried out against merchant vessels, which is endangering international maritime security, is interrupting global supply chains, and hindering the delivery of humanitarian assistance. Likewise, we robustly condemn the air attacks perpetrated by the Houthi group against the Ben Gurion airport in Israel, which is a serious threat to regional security and constitutes a clear violation of international law. President, it is crucial that all parties exercise maximum restraint, that they abstain from provocations or unilateral actions that could undermine regional stability, worsen the conflict, or prevent efforts aimed at guaranteeing the security and well-being of the population. This is why we cannot allow that unilateral actions on the part of Ansar Allah endanger the security and stability in Yemen. We reiterate our firm support for all efforts and actions aimed at restoring peace, security, and the dignity of the Yemeni people. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for this statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher for the comprehensive briefings. We also value the insights shared by Madame Dina Al-Mamoun. We are deeply conscious that Yemen remains gripped by the consequences of over a decade of conflict. Millions continue to endure severe hardship as regional developments, particularly in the Red Sea and the wider Middle East, further escalate tensions and undermine mediation efforts. What began as a domestic crisis has evolved into a deeply entangled regional and international conflict marked by grave humanitarian, political, economic, and environmental challenges. Persistent political divisions, economic collapse, and environmental degradation are exacting a heavy toll on the civilian population. These intersecting crises require urgent, coordinated, and sustained international action. A reinvigorated political process is essential to laying the foundation for a comprehensive and durable resolution. It is not the military, but the political path that is the only viable way forward, as noted by the Special Envoy. We commend Mr. Grunberg for his continued diplomatic efforts, including his recent engagements in Saudi Arabia and meetings with a broad range of stakeholders, including the Yemeni Foreign Minister and the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council. We echo his calls for de-escalation, restraint, and renewed commitment to a Yemeni-owned political process that offers credible assurances to Yemen, the region, and the broader international community. Mr. President, allow me to underscore a few key points. First, Pakistan fully supports a UN-facilitated, Yemeni-owned and Yemeni-led peace process as the only viable path to lasting peace. We welcome the ongoing diplomatic efforts by Saudi Arabia and Oman and urge all parties to build on the December 2023 roadmap, which provides a credible framework for sustainable peace. All sides must honor their commitments, exercise maximum restraint, and prioritize diplomacy above all else. Second, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen remains dire. Over 19.5 million people need assistance, with 17.1 million facing acute food insecurity and 12 million children deprived of essential services. The widening funding gap is deeply concerning, as emphasized by USG Fletcher. We urge all donors to respond swiftly and generously to OCHA's urgent appeal. Third, Pakistan unequivocally condemns attacks on commercial shipping which jeopardize global maritime security. We note the Secretary General's latest report under Resolution 2722, confirming that no recent Houthi attacks on merchant vessels in the Red Sea. Pakistan sees the ceasefire between the Houthis and the United States as a positive development and a testament of the power of diplomacy. This opportunity must not be squandered or exploited. It should be used to advance an inclusive intra-Yemeni political process. Fourth, we strongly condemn the continued detention of the UN and humanitarian personnel, a clear violation of international law. We call for their immediate and unconditional release and stress the urgent need for safe, unimpeded humanitarian access throughout Yemen. Fifth, regional peace and security cannot be separated from the situation in Gaza. The ongoing Israeli aggression not only prolongs the sufferings of the Palestinian people, but also exacerbates the risk of broader regional escalation, as seen in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. A sustained and immediate ceasefire in Gaza is a humanitarian imperative and a prerequisite for regional stability. Mr. President, Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering solidarity with the resilient and brotherly people of Yemen in the pursuit of peace, stability, and prosperity. The international community and this council must remain engaged and act in concert to prevent further deterioration and to help chart a path towards a peaceful and more hopeful future for Yemen. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we're grateful to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Hans Grunberg, as well as to the USG for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher, for their briefings. We also listened very carefully to Ms. Dina El-Mamoun. The Security Council has had its attention focused on the confrontation between the US and the the Ansar Allah Yemeni movement for almost 2 months. The number of people who have perished over this period, according to the media, has surpassed 200 people. Several hundred have been injured. Missile strikes and bombing on the territory of sovereign Yemen were conducted by the US every night, practically. The objective was not only military strikes, but civilian infrastructure was also targeted. This confrontation has had effects on Russia as well. Owing to the US strike on Ras Issa port on the 25th of April, 3 Russian sailors were injured. One of them had to undergo a serious medical operation as a consequence. Yet we cannot say that such actions on the part of Washington were effective in quashing the military capabilities of Ansar Allah, nor did these actions compel the movement to renounce its course of action. We cannot but recall the failure of the team of the previous US President, Joe Biden, who also waged a war against the Houthis, unsuccessfully so, for over a year. The sole outcome of the lengthy bombing campaign on Yemen was an ever more precipitous degradation of the humanitarian situation, which was already horrific. The situation is almost back to the 2022 level, an acute phase of the Yemeni conflict. Many NGOs, against this backdrop, they were forced to halt their operations and to leave Yemen. Their departure was particularly palpable given the fact that the UN has suspended its humanitarian operations in some of the regions in Yemen. A catastrophic blow was dealt to the infrastructure that was used for humanitarian purposes, including Hodeidah port, which was used as a conduit for the lion's share of humanitarian assistance deliveries. These developments, together with the hitherto unresolved issue of UN and other organizations' personnel detained by the Houthis, could become another factor seriously complicating humanitarian work in the country. And yet the effectiveness of this work is what the lives and well-being of ordinary Yemenis directly hinge on. Nonetheless, better late than never, as they say. It would appear that the futility of a military approach, which we've pointed out time and again, has at last been acknowledged by Washington. Proof of this can be seen in the fact that an agreement was concluded just a few days ago, Oman acting as mediator, an agreement between the US and the Houthis on the end to the confrontation. This could be the first step on the path to a general de-escalation of the situation surrounding Yemen. But regrettably, this is not yet the case because, as things stand, Israel has taken up the relay bombing Yemen. We understand that the actions of Western Jerusalem, to a large extent, are a response to the strikes on its territory by the Houthis. And yet, the reaction should be commensurate. We call on Israel to exercise restraint and to avoid taking aggressive steps against Yemen so as to avoid heightening tensions and risks of a large-scale conflict in the region. We need to break this vicious cycle of violence at last, and this must be done at the scale of the entire region. Although we do not justify the actions of Ansar Allah, we shouldn't forget that they, in turn, are a response to the ongoing suffering of civilians in the Gaza Strip. First and foremost, due to the Israeli authorities resuming the blockade of the Strip and the military activities that are ongoing there. The Houthis, through their actions, have secured the support of the Arab street, where the people understand full well, just like the overwhelming majority of Security Council members do, that the only way to end the suffering of peaceable Palestinians is the establishment of an unconditional, sustainable, and long-term ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. This is the priority objective, which we should all be focusing on. We discussed in great detail this issue during the briefing about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Resolving this issue will ensure that Israel is safe from further strikes on the part of the Houthis. Mr. President, we remain disquieted by the gradually intensifying internal conflict in Yemen. Near the line of contact, opposing parties are increasingly engaged in armed incidents. These are being reported more and more. Despite the official Yemeni authorities' efforts, the domestic economic situation remains difficult. we call on all Yemeni parties to immediately halt the use of force, to eschew bellicose rhetoric and unilateral actions, as these do nothing to advance a sustainable normalization of the situation in the country. Instead, the course should be for dialogue in the interests of such a solution, one which would exclude any further bloodshed. Mr. President, under these unstable conditions, external actors should redouble their efforts so as to swiftly resume an inclusive negotiations process with the participation of all Yemeni political forces. What is also needed is engagement with these forces across the most acute issues, including an exchange of prisoners of war. We see no alternative to a comprehensive political process under UN auspices on the basis of prior agreements set forth in the roadmap. This is the only way for the intra-Yemeni situation to be normalized and to go down the optimal path. In light of this, we call on Special Envoy Grunberg to be more active. It's necessary to look for possible common ground among the parties so as to guide them towards mutually acceptable outcomes. On our side, we are continuing and will continue to provide the Special Envoy with all possible assistance, and we call on all responsible members of the international community to do the same. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher, and Ms. Dina Al-Mamoun for your briefings. And I also welcome the representative of Yemen. Colleagues, on May 6, President Trump announced that the United States had stopped military strikes against the Houthis. Contrary to the characterizations and disinformation of some, the United States had been conducting precision strike operations against Houthi assets, such as terrorist compounds. And our objective has been to restore freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and surrounding waterways after years of Houthi terrorist attacks. And it is on that topic that I will focus my remarks today. The Houthis' capitulation marks a success for the U.S. approach. Whether strikes continue is up to the Houthis. As President Trump said, the Houthis don't want to fight anymore. They are exhausted. The strikes killed hundreds of Houthi fighters and numerous Houthi leaders. U.S. military operations disabled infrastructure that facilitated fuel imports, fuel that supported the terrorist objectives of the Houthis. Mr. President, the United States will not accept illicit smuggling of fuel and war material to a terrorist organization. We remain committed to disrupting the Houthis' illicit revenue generation, financial facilitators, and suppliers. We remind member states that providing material support or resources to a U.S.-designated foreign terrorist organization is a potential violation of U.S. law. The United States will pursue all possible sanctions against relevant individuals and entities. Colleagues, all member states have an obligation to enforce UN Security Council Resolution 2216. Iran has enabled Houthi attacks with military, logistical, and intelligence support. This council must not tolerate Iranian defiance of its resolutions and should impose consequences on sanctions violators using the tools at its disposal. The most recent Houthi attacks against Israel serve as a stark reminder of the threat that they pose to regional stability. We recognize Israel's legitimate security concerns and support its right to self-defense against Iranian-backed terrorist groups like the Houthis. The United States condemns all attacks by the Houthis, especially on civilians. The UN verification and inspection mechanism has the potential to be a critical tool in preventing arms from reaching the Houthis. UNVIM operations and enforcement must be improved. We urge that member states provide financial support for this mechanism to increase its effectiveness. By donating directly to UNVIM operations, which need only $11 million per year. Member states should also provide the naval assets necessary to ensure interdiction of ships not verified by UNVIM. A fully operational UNVIM can allow a focus of limited collective resources also on other means of smuggling, such as dhows and overland routes. Mr. President, I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of A3+, namely Algeria, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and my own country, Somalia. We thank today's briefers, Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, Under Secretary General Tom Fletcher, and Ms. Dina El Mamoun from the Civic for their valuable insights and briefings. We also welcome the participation of Permanent Representative of Yemen in today's meeting. Mr. President, A3+ welcomes the recent ceasefire deal reached between Houthis and the United States of America, giving a new hope for the possibility of achieving progress on the political track in Yemen. We commend the Sultanate of Oman for its mediation, express our appreciation to His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq for Oman's continued commitment to the regional peace. We urge all parties to build on this promising and positive development and to re-engage in a Yemeni-led, Yemeni-owned political process under UN auspices. Only a negotiated and inclusive political settlement can bring a lasting peace in Yemen. We also demand an immediate release of all aid workers and former staff of diplomatic missions who have been detained by the Houthis and insist in full respect for their human rights and special protection granted to the humanitarian workers under the international humanitarian law. With over half of the population of Yemen depend on aid and many facing food insecurity, displacement, and lack of access to essential services, these detentions can exacerbate the already catastrophic humanitarian crisis, thereby putting the lives of millions of Yemenis at risk. We insist that aid operations must never be politicized nor obstructed and continue to demand protection of all humanitarian workers and unembedded access to those in need. We are also encouraged that there has been no recent attacks in the Red Sea as reported by the Secretary General, and we hope that this trend will continue. Mr. President, we commend the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg for his valuable updates on the latest development in Yemen and for his continued effort to facilitate the political process aimed at de-escalating tensions and ending the conflict. A3+ recognizes and commends OCHA's critical role in addressing the needs of those in need despite the growing challenges. We also support the call for an increased, flexible, and predictable funding for 2025 humanitarian response plan, especially in light of the severe malnutrition crisis, hence urging the international community to intensify support for early recovery. Mr. President, we appreciate Ms. Al-Mamoun's intervention highlighting the impact of the conflict on women and girls in Yemen. We remain concerned about the reports of violation of their human rights, including restrictions placed on their movement, arbitrary detention, and other discriminatory practices. Such measures are inconsistent with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We welcome the government of Yemen's support for women's participation in the political process and encourage continued effort to promote their protection and leadership in the peace building. Mr. President, A3+ reaffirms the importance of Yemen's unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. We remain fully supportive of the efforts of Special Envoy Grunberg and recognize the continued contribution of the regional actors, particularly Saudi Arabia and Oman, in facilitating constructive engagement. In this context, A3+ firmly maintains that securing an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza is critical toward a lasting peace throughout the region. The group is concerned about Israeli airstrikes and wider ramification of the Gaza conflict. This action is undermine peace efforts and further destabilize an already fragile situations. We urge all external actors to respect Yemen's sovereignty and refrain from military escalations. We also stress the need to halt any actions that risk fueling the conflict in Yemen, which threatens to reverse hard-won gains and deepen the humanitarian crisis. In conclusion, A3+ stands firmly behind a peaceful, inclusive, and sustainable resolution to the conflict of Yemen. We urge all parties to act with responsibility and this Council to remain united in support of Yemen's path toward stability and recovery. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for this statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to begin by thanking Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Hans Grunberg, US Chief for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher, and Ms. Dina El Mamoun from the Center for Civilians in Conflict. You presented to us the reality of the situation. I also welcome the representative of Yemen in the meeting. President, France firmly condemns the recent attacks of the Houthis against Israel. These are unacceptable. They threaten regional security. Ansar Allah, supported by Iran, must cease its destabilizing activities in Yemen, in the Red Sea, and in the Middle East. This Council must be able to condemn with one voice and unambiguously the situation. Nothing justifies Ansar's external and internal actions. We welcome the Houthi-US agreement. We will continue our commitment as part of the defensive operation of the security and defense policy of the European Union, ASPIDES, in order to protect maritime safety and the freedom of navigation in accordance with international law and working together with our partners. The Houthis must stop their unacceptable hindrances to humanitarian action. We are deeply concerned at the humanitarian situation in Yemen and the situation for the most vulnerable, particularly children and women. They are the primary victims. And I would refer here to the declaration of our group, Women, Peace and Security, this morning. Houthis must guarantee safe and unhindered access to all areas of the population under their control. France would call upon the Houthis in particular to allow the United Nations to continue with its work in the governorate of Sada, which has been interrupted now for 3 months. We repeat our condemnation of the arbitrary detention of dozens of UN and humanitarian staff, local and international, members of civil society of Yemen, and diplomatic missions. We take note of the recent releases and we call for the immediate and unconditional release of all those that are still completely illegally detained. This Council must continue to require of the Houthis that humanitarian actors are able to carry out their work in complete safety. President, this situation must not make us lose sight of the fact that only an inclusive political solution will put an end to the conflict. France reiterates its support for the legitimate government of Yemen, which must pursue its efforts to meet the expectations of the Yemeni population overall. We express our full support to the work of the Special Envoy to bring about peace in Yemen that will open the path to a political solution that is negotiated and inclusive for a unified and sovereign Yemen. We reaffirm our commitment to the stability of Yemen and regional security. We recall the need to avoid any further escalation of violence in the region, and we call upon Iran to cease its support for these destabilizing actions in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank the representative of France for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and USG Fletcher, as well as Director El Mamoun for their informative briefings. Mr. President, over the past month, the security landscape in the Middle East has seen an alarming deterioration. Yemen, unfortunately, has not been spared. Denmark strongly condemns the Houthis' attacks against vessels in the Red Sea and against Israel, including the attack near the Ben Gurion airport on May 4th. We urge all parties to comply with international humanitarian law. Humanitarian personnel must also be protected. The announced ceasefire deal between the United States and the Houthis give hope for a path towards de-escalation and dialogue. We thank Oman for their efforts in mediating this deal and for their continuous support for efforts to achieve peace in Yemen. Maritime security and freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden must be fully restored. Mr. President, regarding the humanitarian situation, we remain gravely concerned about the conflict's disproportionate impact on women and children, as also highlighted by USG Fletcher. As we heard, a staggering 9.6 million women and girls in Yemen are in need of life-saving humanitarian aid. At the same time, 1.4 million pregnant and breastfeeding women are facing acute malnutrition. Food insecurity has forced many parents to make the choice not to eat to be able to feed their children. Despite this, nearly 1 in every 2 children under 5 is malnourished, a tragic record almost unparalleled globally. This will not only affect the current generation, it will have health implications for generations to come. In this dire situation, we reiterate that all parties must respect international humanitarian law and allow the rapid, safe, and unimpeded provision of humanitarian assistance. This also means an immediate end to the arbitrary detentions on UN staff, civil society representatives, and others. Since the beginning of the conflict, Denmark has contributed with more than $200 million to humanitarian operations in Yemen. We call on the international community to recommit to assisting the people of Yemen, in particular the country's women and children. Mr. President, at the time where the humanitarian situation has reached a new breaking point, the courage and resilience of Yemeni women give hope for a better future. Restrictions and targeting of women-led CSOs, in particular by the Houthis, have for too long made it difficult for Yemeni women to participate in Yemeni society. Yet, as we've heard from Ms. Al-Mamoun, despite immense challenges compounded by years of conflict, Yemeni women are playing a constructive and important role in efforts for peace, development, and provision of humanitarian assistance. They are shaping their own futures by stepping into university classrooms in increasing numbers, claiming their right to education, by launching businesses, generating job opportunities and livelihoods, and they are founding grassroots organizations, promoting human rights and serving the most vulnerable communities at the front line of the humanitarian response. Their contributions and perspectives must be recognized, included, and nurtured. We call for a full and meaningful inclusion of women in all UN-led peace efforts, including intra-Yemeni talks, as well as other diplomatic efforts to settle the conflict. This in line with the minimum 30% quota established by the National Dialogue Conference. Mr. President, growing security challenges and humanitarian suffering unfortunately have no quick fix. As Undersecretary General Fletcher stated, the people of Yemen need aid, but they also need peace. Ensuring women's meaningful political participation is central to advancing a UN-led political process to find a lasting solution to the conflict in Yemen, and we offer our full support to Special Envoy Grunberg's efforts in this regard. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and USG Fletcher for their briefings. I also listened carefully to the statement by civil society representative Ms. Al-Mamoun. Welcome to today's meeting, the permanent representative of Yemen. I'll make 3 points. First, staying committed to easing the situation in the Red Sea as soon as possible. The situation in the Red Sea continues to be volatile, which is concerning. Over the past 2 months, the US and the UK have carried out airstrikes against Yemen, and the Houthis and Israel have launched attacks against each other, causing heavy casualties and infrastructure damage. Recently, the US and the Houthis reached a ceasefire agreement. China welcomes this and commends the efforts by Oman in this regard. We hope that all parties will take this as an opportunity to cool down the situation at an early date. China reiterates its call on all parties to exercise calm and restraint and to refrain from any action that exacerbates tension. We call on the Houthis to stop assaulting commercial vessels and maintain the safety of Red Sea shipping lanes. The sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Yemen should be respected, and the ceasefire agreement that has been reached should be implemented. Second, staying committed to dialogue and negotiation. The Yemeni issue has complex issues, ultimately requires a political solution. We call on all parties in Yemen to show determination and willingness, resume contact and communication, resolve differences through dialogue and negotiation, and promote a comprehensive political process that is Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned, so as to achieve reconciliation and economic reconstruction at an early date. China supports regional countries in playing a greater role in this regard and supports the continued efforts by Special Grunberg to this end. Third, increasing humanitarian assistance to Yemen. The humanitarian work in Yemen faces multiple challenges such as insufficient funding, security risks, and the spillover effects of the policies of a major country. This urgently requires greater support from the international community. Under no circumstances should civilians and civilian infrastructure be targeted. China calls on the Houthis to immediately and unconditionally release all detained personnel. President, the tension in the Red Sea is closely linked to the situation in Gaza. Recently, in disregard of strong opposition of the international community, Israel has resumed fighting in Gaza and imposed a siege of and blockade on Gaza, posing additional challenges to the security and stability of the region. This is deeply concerning and worrying. The international community should make realizing a lasting ceasefire in Gaza an overriding priority so as to de-escalate the overall situation in the region and restore peace and stability in Yemen and Red Sea. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, President. I wish to thank Special Envoy Grunberg, USG Fletcher, and Ms. El Mamoun for the briefings. I also welcome the permanent representative of Yemen to the meeting. President, must be protected at all times. We also call for reinvigorated discussions on a nationwide ceasefire and inclusive UN-led peace process, focusing on the needs and aspirations of the Yemeni people. In particular, we urge the Houthis to return to the negotiating table. We reiterate our full support for the Special Envoy and the work of his office, and stress the importance of united international community on the path forward for Yemen. This path has to meaningfully include Yemeni women at every stage of the process, as highlighted powerfully by Ms. El Mamoun. Women's rights should not be negotiable in any future peace and political process. They should not be an afterthought. Mr. President, the already limited humanitarian space in Yemen continues to shrink and the system is under strain. We should have no illusions regarding the long-term impact of this protracted crisis. Food insecurity leading to child stunting, outbreaks of epidemics overwhelming the fragile healthcare system, landmines and explosive remnants of war, as well as climate change, hindering business and agricultural life. Ordinary Yemenis should not be punished for the Houthi actions. We therefore welcome any moves aimed at facilitating principled humanitarian actions to reach those most in need, and any increase in humanitarian funding, including from the region. We look forward to the outcome of the 7th senior official meeting on Yemen in Brussels later this month. Slovenia continues to call for the immediate and unconditional release of the UN, humanitarian, and NGO workers cruelly detained by the Houthis. Recent releases are welcome, but not enough. We commend the UN system and all humanitarians for their commitment to staying and delivering for the vulnerable in Yemen, even though the challenges are immense, especially for women humanitarians whose work is shamefully restricted. We should reflect on the lessons learned from the 10 years of unsuccessful military campaigns. There is no military solution to the conflict. To conclude, Mr. President, a brighter future has to lie ahead for Yemen, and this future cannot include a return to all-out war. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank Special Envoy Hans Grundberg, OCHA USG Tom Fletcher, and Ms. El Mamoun for their briefings. I also welcome the representative of Yemen to today's meeting. We wish to share the following points today. First, regarding fragile situation on the ground. While we welcome the US Houthi agreement to cease attacks, we are gravely alarmed by the Houthi strike near Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, which was followed by Israel's subsequent counter airstrikes. This underscores the ongoing volatility in the region. Also, even after Houthis' commitment to halt attacks against commercial vessels in the Red Sea, the continued reluctance of the shipping industry to resume passage there is significantly hampering the global supply chain. Nevertheless, we hope that this US Houthi agreement may serve as a foundation for building peace and stability in and around Yemen. To achieve this, the Houthis must refrain from all escalatory actions under the pretext of Gaza crisis. In addition, we express concern over damage to vital civilian infrastructure, including the port of Hodeidah, which serves as a lifeline for the Yemeni people, accounting for 80% of Yemen's food imports. Such damage exacerbates food insecurity and daily hardships faced by civilians. In this context, we echo the Secretary General's call for full respect of international humanitarian law under all circumstances and emphasize the urgent need to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. Second, on the arms embargo, the recent Houthi ballistic missile attack targeting Israel using advanced weapon systems once again exemplifies systematic violations of the Security Council's arms embargo, as documented in last year's final report by the panel of experts. In this light, we stress the importance of appointing the panel's arms expert without further delay. While we welcome the recent appointment of 4 members of the Yemen Sanctions Committee panel of experts, the absence of the arms expert, whose role is central to monitoring arms flows and sanctions implementation, significantly undermines the panel's effectiveness as a whole. We also recognize the critical role of UNBIM in implementing the arms embargo and alleviating the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Korea will actively pursue ways to support its effective activities. Third, on the dire humanitarian and human rights situation. As today's briefers highlighted, women and children in particular continue to bear the brunt of worsening humanitarian crisis. As part of our efforts to help ease the malnutrition and the food insecurity, as emphasized by OCHA, the Republic of Korea will continue our support, including the provision of 23,000 tons of rice this year in partnership with WFP. We emphasize that a brighter future for Yemen can be assured only when human rights and the fundamental freedoms of women and girls are fully respected and protected. Their participation in public life, including access to education, is essential for a sustainable and lasting peace and stability in Yemen. In addition, we strongly demand once again the Houthis to immediately release all individuals arbitrarily detained, including humanitarian workers and UN personnel, and to guarantee unimpeded access for humanitarian operations. Fourth, regarding the importance of diplomatic efforts, in light of the volatile regional context, the diplomatic efforts of all relevant actors, particularly key regional countries, are more imperative than ever. We recognize the constructive role recently played by Oman in mediating between the US and Houthis, and we take note of the special envoy's continued diplomatic outreach, including his recent visit to Saudi Arabia. To conclude, Mr. President, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its support for the long-stalled Yemeni-led political transition process. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of Greece. I would like to thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Under-Secretary General Tom Fletcher for the informative briefings and continued engagement to promote peace and stability in the region. I would also like to thank Mrs. Dina El Mamoun for her insightful remarks, as well as to welcome the presence here today of the Permanent Representative of Yemen. Dear colleagues, the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Yemen is highly alarming. We are witnessing unprecedented levels of food insecurity, malnutrition, and cholera, which affect the most vulnerable groups, especially women and children. This situation is unsustainable, with detrimental effects for stability in Yemen and the region. Unhindered humanitarian assistance and protection need to be sustained and intensified in all feasible manners. I would like to make the following points. Firstly, women continue to bear a great extent the brunt of the crisis. Extensive violation of human rights and international humanitarian law in the Houthi-controlled areas, including sexual and gender-based violence, lead a growing number of women being deprived even of the core freedoms and human rights. Women humanitarian workers, journalists, and human rights defenders continue to be the targets of violence and arbitrary detention. We deem women's effective participation in the peace process as essential for a sustainable political solution, and it is vital to empower women and combat the marginalization of such an important part of the Yemeni society. Second, we strongly condemn the continuous unlawful and unjustifiable detention of diplomatic staff, UN and NGO personnel, and humanitarian workers by the Houthis. We welcome the recent release of 2 personnel members, and we call for the immediate and unconditional release of all of them. It is imperative that all diplomatic and humanitarian personnel operate in a secure environment indiscriminately, and the safety must be guaranteed at all times. Third, we remain deeply concerned about the assistance received by the Houthis, including through a collaborative network of terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab. We call on all member states to respect the arms embargo established with Security Council Resolution 2216 of 2015 and refrain from any form of support and transfer of weaponry and advanced technology in violations of the international obligations thereto. We believe that UNVIM holds an important role in the verification and inspection of merchant vessels by upholding the arms embargo. Therefore, it needs to be provided with adequate funding and additional means in order to further enhance its operational capabilities. Fourth, we need not to lose sight of the continuous precarious situation in the Red Sea region. The threat of Houthi attacks against transiting vessels remains a constant deterring factor for maritime shipping. We call for the halting of the practice of indiscriminate and arbitrary detention of commercial and merchant vessels and the crews by the Houthis, and for upholding the safety of seafarers. Greece remains dedicated to safeguarding maritime security and freedom of navigation through the EU naval operation Aspides in the Red Sea, with full respect to the operation's defensive posture. We commend the outstanding results of this EU operation, which has escorted more than 440 ships over the first year of its mandate. We welcome the recent ceasefire agreement reached between the US and the Houthis and facilitated by Oman, as well as any initiative which can prevent and deter Houthi attacks and sustainably protect the safety of international maritime routes. Support by regional and international stakeholders will be instrumental in this respect. But let us not forget that we are witnessing ongoing escalatory actions by the Houthis, who continue launching unjustified attacks against Israel with systematic use of advanced weaponry, even against civilian infrastructure. We strongly condemn these attacks and repeat that international humanitarian law must be fully and unconditionally respected by all, especially regarding the need to protect civilian population and civilian infrastructure. Finally, I want to reiterate our full and wholehearted support for the SG Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and his dedicated efforts to revitalize the peace dialogue in Yemen through an inclusive Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process under the UN auspices, with full respect of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity of Yemen. We commend the Special Envoy's continuous endeavors to bring the Yemeni parties back on the negotiation path, aiming at de-escalation and sustainable and durable political settlement. Peace and a durable political settlement in Yemen are ultimately the keys for addressing the sufferings of the Yemeni people, as well as enhancing regional stability and security, including maritime security and the freedom of navigation. I thank you. I resume now my functions as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Yemen.
Allow me at the outset, Mr. President, to congratulate you on presiding over the Council for this month. I wish you and your team all the success. I would like also to congratulate your predecessor, the permanent representative of France, this brotherly country, for their successful presidency of the Council last month. I would also like to thank Mr. Hans Grundberg and Mr. Tom Fletcher and the dear sister Dina Al-Mamoun for their briefings. Mr. President, the Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council and the Yemeni government stress their keenness to end this conflict and bring about comprehensive and sustainable peace in Yemen based on the agreed upon terms of reference of the political solution, foremost UN Security Council Resolution 2216. We regret to say today that all this keenness, all these regional and international efforts, and the effort of the United Nations through its special envoy to Yemen, which are all aimed at ending this crisis, were met with the intransigence and rejection of the terrorist Houthi militias supported by the Iranian regime. Those militias sought to thwart all efforts and initiatives during the past years. Experience proved that these militias do not believe in peace or dialogue. They do not commit to agreements, nor respect all these efforts and endeavors to end their war. They refuse to engage sincerely and in good faith on the political track. Instead, they are trying to extend their war against the Yemeni people, destroying their sources of livelihood and deepening the suffering of the Yemenis. They bring more violence, escalation, suppression, and violation in all areas under their control. They threaten regional and international interests, as well as international maritime routes and vessels in the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Aden. Those militias sustain a policy of starvation and impoverishment of the Yemenis while destroying all means of livelihood or hopes for normal or a decent life. The Houthi militias do not see the Yemeni people as anything but fuel for their wars that serve their subversive schemes and the interests of their supporters. They have turned Yemenis into tools to implement agendas that have nothing to do with the history, culture, or civilization of this ancient people and their interests. They are rather trading in the blood of Yemenis to achieve military, political, and media gains. They have plunged the Yemeni citizen into a state of poverty and hunger, destroying Yemen's economic and cultural resources as well as its national fabric. They've also imposed a systematic economic blockade on the Yemeni government and people through their terrorist acts, targeting oil facilities and oil export ports. They are impeding the delivery of humanitarian aid to those in need and sacking public servants' salaries to use them in the war against Yemenis. The Presidential Leadership Council and the Yemeni government hold the Houthi militias fully responsible for destroying the Yemeni people's resources and infrastructure, harming the interests of the Yemeni people and their national security, endangering the lives and livelihoods of Yemenis, dragging Yemen into endless wars. They tempted the international community to strike against Yemeni targets, militarizing regional waters as a reaction and a predictable outcome to deter their threats and attacks on international shipping routes, which are the backbone of the global economy. We renew the call for peace to these militias to stop their aggressive approach, prioritizing national interests over their interests and those of their supporters. We call on them to lay down their arms, embrace peace, abandon the Iranian subversive scheme in Yemen and the region, while turning the page on this conflict. This would start building a bright future that will restore Yemen's freedom, glory, dignity, and sovereignty. We commend the efforts of the international community to secure and protect the international sea routes in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Strait. However, we reaffirm once again that ending the threat of the Houthi militias on these waterways and shipping routes is contingent on providing support to the Yemeni government. This would allow the government to exercise its authority over all Yemeni territory. We need to create an effective strategic partnership with the international community at all levels, building a collective approach to stop this threat and ensure the security and stability of Yemen and the region. This would bring about regional and international security and stability, strengthen the capability of the Yemeni government as a close partner in fighting terrorism and organized crime. It will allow us collectively to secure regional waters and international maritime corridors. We reaffirm that the success of any political approach to achieve stability and peace in Yemen requires recognizing the root causes of the nature of this conflict. We must identify the reality and approach of the Houthi militias, not condoning their practices, but aborting their effort and initiatives so that we can end this devastating war. This would put an end to the influence and interference of the Iranian regime in the affairs of Yemen and the region, which disrupts regional and international security and stability. We need collective action to deter the danger and threat of the Houthi militias and designate them as a foreign terrorist group. In this context, we call on the international community and all partners to join steps to classify these militias as a foreign terrorist organization, given the threat they pose to the region and the world. We must take strong steps to dry up the sources of financing, because if we do not stop these terrorist acts, we will only face more blackmailing, chaos, and destruction in Yemen and the region. Mr. President, the Yemeni government is making great effort to continue implementing comprehensive reforms to face the enormous challenges in the economic, financial, monetary, administrative, and humanitarian aspects, while fulfilling its obligations and activating governance mechanisms. We are also aiming at promoting the principles of transparency to ensure the standards of efficiency and integrity, achieving economic stability and improving economic and humanitarian conditions, while ensuring that this would reflect positively on the level of basic services and living conditions of citizens. However, the current and major challenges facing the Yemeni government are the acute shortage of the main public revenues that our state budget depends upon. The Houthi militia's targeting of oil export facilities and the complete halt of oil and gas exports led to the disruption of the most important economic sector in Yemen. Oil exports contribute with nearly 90% of our total commodity exports and 80% of the total revenues of the state's general budget. By stopping the production and export of oil and gas, the state lost the most important source of hard currency flow that feed foreign exchange reserves, finance imports of food and non-food goods, and support exchange rate stability. The decline in the volume of public resources threatened the government's ability to fulfill its financial obligations to spend on public services, for most electricity, while paying employees' salaries. The impact of the halt of oil exports is not limited to the government's loss of more financial resources, estimated at about 7.5 billion US dollars since October 2020. But such cessation of oil export has led to the deterioration of the national currency and weakened the government's ability to intervene in the exchange markets or provide the necessary currency to import goods, provide basic services, or pay salaries to employees on a regular basis. In addition, this led to a decline in economic and social indicators and development indicators. The Yemeni government once again calls on the international community and this esteemed council to provide assistance to find possible ways and means to resume the export of oil and gas as a key step towards achieving stability and economic recovery. This would enable the Yemeni people to benefit from their natural resources and reduce dependence on external economic and humanitarian assistance. The continued Houthi threats and the continued suspension of oil and gas exports are accelerating the disastrous consequences on society, worsening economic and humanitarian conditions, disrupting all services, including health and education sectors. It also restricts the livelihoods of Yemenis. In this vein, we express our great thanks and gratitude for the position of our brothers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, alongside the Yemeni people and their government in various circumstances. They provided support to face such exceptional challenges, alleviating the suffering of the Yemeni people through the provision of development and humanitarian interventions in various fields. This represents an important factor in the continued fulfillment by the Yemeni government of its inevitable obligations. Mr. President, for nearly a year, we have witnessed an unprecedented wave of kidnappings and arbitrary arrests by the Houthi terrorist militias against employees of the UN, international organizations operating in Yemen, civil society, and diplomatic missions. The United Nations and this esteemed council did not take any effective or concrete measures to release them unconditionally. A year has passed, and the humanitarian and relief community in areas controlled by the Houthi militias is feeling let down. They are suffering from an increased fear, while UN agencies continue to operate business as usual. The impunity and lack of a serious response to the Houthi militias' disregard for the safety of staff of the UN, international organizations, and civil society emboldens these militias to continue committing more violations. We reiterate the Yemeni government's warning that these militias will not stop blackmailing the international and humanitarian community. They will carry out more detentions and violations against civilians and humanitarian workers. They will not stop mistreating the forcibly detained in their prisons. In that context, the Yemeni government once again calls for United Nations agencies and international organizations operating in Yemen to be relocated to the temporary capital of Aden to ensure a safe and stable environment in which to conduct humanitarian and relief work without obstacles, and to stop the looting of aid by the Houthi militias to serve the so-called war effort, and this only expands the war against the Yemeni people. In light of the deteriorating economic and humanitarian situation imposed by the Houthi militias, as well as the internal displacement crisis, climate-related disasters, and the accompanying epidemics and diseases, the lack of funding for the 2024 humanitarian response plan threatens to deprive millions of life-saving assistance. They are not provided with food or health care or protection and safety. It also threatens to increase the rates of acute food insecurity and malnutrition, especially among women, children, and the elderly, particularly in light of the obstacles and hindrances faced by humanitarian organizations in areas controlled by the Houthi militias. Mr. President, there is no doubt that women and children are the groups most affected by this conflict. Yemeni women in areas under the control of the Houthi militias are subjected to unprecedented crimes and violations. The Houthi militias practice abduction and forced disappearance crimes against them. They are also subjected to violence and extortion, in addition to the crimes of harassment, sexual assault, psychological and physical torture, imposing strict procedures and restrictions to restrict them from movement and depriving them of their most basic rights to obtain a quality education or engage in work outside their home or to participate in the political and social life or contribute in building their society. While we appreciate the effort made to alleviate the humanitarian suffering in Yemen, we call on the international community and the United Nations to strengthen support for the humanitarian response plan in Yemen and fill the existing funding gap, especially in light of the increasing humanitarian needs. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Yemen for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite Council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on this subject. The meeting is adjourned.
you.